Next on the agenda, we have Mr. Scott Simonton, who's the Risk Assessment Advisor for the Environmental Quality Group. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. You're certainly welcome. I am Scott Simonton. I'm a professor at Marsh University. I'm the vice chair of the West Virginia Environmental Quality Board. I'm a registered PE here in the state of West Virginia, and I've been asked by a lot of people, but including the law firm of Thompson and Barney, to look into the spill and the results and impacts from this spill. So we've been looking at a lot of data. The data continues to come in. There's so much that we don't know, but I will talk about some of our continuing concerns with the spill. And I say we a lot. I've been working closely with Dr. Ben Stout out of Wheeling Jesuit and Dr. Stephen King, a toxicologist out of Texas. We're all pretty familiar with the spill itself. I'll move through these quickly. Sheen on the water downstream of the spill site. We have sample results. They're continuing to come in, some as recently as yesterday, probably more today. We've had certainly aluminum hits. They're downstream of the site that are curious to us. We don't have upstream sampling. And we're certainly seeing the MCHM both in the river and in the water systems. So, and that's no big secret that the MCHM is pretty widespread. A lot of different samples have been taken by a lot of different folks, including myself. We can see the MCHM results, many of them above that emergency target standard of 1 ppm that was issued, and that we're frankly, I'm personally concerned with how that was promulgated, but that's the target that we have. And so, as we can see by these sampling results, certainly there's plenty of samples that are above that 1 pH or 1 milligram per liter. These results are in micrograms per liter, so that top result, for example, 1600 would be 1.6 milligrams per liter. So these are in, as you can see, as far away as Sharples in Logan County, downtown, restaurants, people's homes, and over time, certainly since the event. And we continue, for those of us who are on the system, you can still certainly smell it even now, and certainly in water heaters, and plenty of people are still complaining about the odors, and a lot of people still, of course, are not drinking it. Mention the water heaters real quick, and that's one of the places we're seeing it the most, or at least smelling it, because as this stuff gets warm, the contaminant in a water heater is probably going to be driven to the top anyway, and also as it warms, it's going to be more volatile, therefore we're going to smell it more. So again, we're continuing to see that, and we also know, or we feel that the data is showing that this stuff kind of sticks. So simply flushing it isn't doing the trick. Certainly not flushing it for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Matter of fact, many people have flushed for hours and hours and hours and still get that smell. And so it's going to take a long time for that to work its way completely out of the water distribution system. So a continuing concern. We don't know, and one of our initial concerns was that we don't know what happens to this stuff once it gets in the environment. Earlier, you all talked about the fact that investigations need to be done on what else is out there. Based on my experience, I would be shocked if MCHM and the contaminants resulting from this latest catastrophic event are the only ones emanating from that facility. It's a very old facility, old tanks, and again, in my experience, I could bet you that other things have leaked from that site. So we don't know that. We also don't know what happens to MCHM, these other chemicals, once they get into the environment, or once they get into a water treatment system and go through chlorination, and what happens once they're metabolized in the human body. So one of our concerns was looking for those breakdown products, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot of folks are looking for those things, but organic contaminants turn into other things once they get out into the environment. We're seeing health effects, and we've seen in the paper hundreds of people have ended up in the hospital. This is Judy Prey. She's a teacher in Kanawha County schools. Her kids go to school with my kids. she's had some sort of crazy reaction when taking a bath recently. And she had been avoiding the water and avoiding the water and avoiding the water. And finally, I believe she had a cold and just wanted to take a hot bath and ended up in the ER because of it. And so it seems that the only difference in her world was taking that bath. Everything else was the same. And so we're seeing at least this anecdotal evidence that some people are more sensitive. And we also don't know, again, going back to what happens to this chemical in the environment, we also don't know what happens when it reacts with makeup or soap or shampoo or toothpaste or anything else that we come into contact with every day. So those are questions that we still have. And very reasonable concerns when we start seeing things like this. Now, this could be something else, but the only difference for her that she was quite sure of was the fact that she was in the water. So we know some people are more susceptible. That's true with any contaminant and any human health effect. Eastman studies show no adverse effects in some studies, and other studies, of course, with rats and fish shows a lot of toxicity in MCHM. This is the MSDS from Eastman, the material safety data sheet. You can see that according to the MSDS, it causes skin irritation, harmful if swallowed, eye irritation, and it has acute toxicity. Much of the toxicity testing that was done on MCHM and these chemicals was in fact acute testing, not low levels over a long period of time, but acute tests where frankly they kill the rats off pretty quickly. And so high levels of the contaminant were shown to be quite toxic. And we've just now started, or I personally have just started looking at a lot of that toxicity testing. It continues to be found and come in, but certainly what I've seen would certainly show that this stuff by itself is toxic. And again, to reiterate, we don't know what it turns into. We have our ideas of what it turns into, at least some of the things. What's interesting in some of the toxicity testing was the MCHM was so toxic and caused so many problems to the test species that they couldn't even determine exactly what the cause of death was. There were so many things impacting, or so many health effects on the rats, it was hard to tell even exactly what it was that killed them. We also looked at some of the, frankly, kind of discrepancies in some of the testing that was done, certain problems I won't get into for lack of time, but we can see from some of these documents that, for example, stability of the test substance, exactly what the concentrations were not determined prior to the test start, the request of the sponsor, which I believe was Eastman. Uniformity and concentration of the test substance was also not confirmed at the request of the sponsor. I'm curious as to why that was. Another issue was the rat species themselves and some of this toxicity testing. Keeping in mind that the toxicity testing was pretty limited. There's not a whole lot of it out there, not something that we'd see, for example, to develop a safe drinking water maximum contaminant level, where we look at a lot of toxicity testing over a long period of time. This was kind of a snapshot that Eastman did at some point in time. But one of the things that causes us concern is the fact that, in effect, the MCHM had a really huge impact and near 100% mortality on a certain species of rat, and so Eastman decided to use a different rat, and that wasn't quite as susceptible. And there's no really good explanation as to why they did that, and except in this one paragraph, and frankly, that deserves more than a paragraph of explanation on why you would change rats, because it looks like, well, we don't like the results of this rat, so we're going to use a rat that's maybe a little tougher. I don't know. Again, our big concern is how this stuff reacts in the environment and in a treatment plant. The safety data sheets, again, say that conditions to avoid, for example, are excessive heat. It doesn't go into what excessive heat is, but certainly we see that our current exposures include hot showers. and we know that it increases the volatility, and of course the dermal exposure is considerable, as well as, and this is important, I'll get to this in a minute, once we're in a hot shower, we're also breathing it a whole lot more. All right, so even if we're avoiding drinking it, we're still breathing whatever's coming through our shower nozzle. So a big concern. We see that hazardous decomposition products on the Eastman MSDS are carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. That's true of any organic contaminant. They're going to eventually mineralize to carbon dioxide and water. But it's a lot. There's going to be a lot of steps in between MCHM and carbon dioxide that we're concerned about. It turns into other things on its way to complete mineralization. MCHM, I'll just fly through these pretty quickly. We've all heard of what it's composed of: methyl cyclohexane methanol. Basically, these molecules are brought together for the crude MCHM. Our concern is what happens once this stuff starts breaking down. We have felt, and we can look at things, and we know, for example, that methanol can break down to formaldehyde. So our concern was these breakdown products. Formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen. That's important. And so we thought, wow, we should be looking for formaldehyde. And sure enough, we have found formaldehyde in the water system. In this case, it is at Vandalia Grill downtown. I took these samples, and formaldehyde is showing up. Again, formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen, and its most toxic route of action, or where it's most toxic, is in fact inhalation. And if we look at EPA standards, the inhalation standard for formaldehyde is extremely small, less than a part per billion. So at that point, it certainly becomes a risk. We don't know what the concentration of is in air, but we can bet, well, I can guarantee you that the citizens of this valley are, at least in some instances, breathing formaldehyde. If they're taking a hot shower, this stuff is breaking down to formaldehyde in the shower or in the water system, and they're inhaling it. The biggest risk from formaldehyde is cancers of the respiratory system. So we don't know what the total risk is. Again, we just got these results yesterday. And so the formaldehyde that's showing up is certainly a huge cause for concern, and goes to our belief that the population here, all of us that have been exposed, need to be monitored over time. This is a population that's been exposed, and we don't know to what extent. So certainly more study needs to be done to determine what kind of exposures to not only formaldehyde but other breakdown products are occurring currently. Hit on that. Those are the levels that we found at Vandalia. Again, we've started normally sampling for some of these breakdown products, and just like MCHM, the labs are only able to analyze for certain things. And we've all heard the stories of how the labs had a tough time with MCHM and had to develop new standards. Well, the same is true for these breakdown products. Formaldehyde is something that's commonly done by the labs, and so that's an easy one. There are other breakdown products that are not as easily analyzed for. And one other point I want to make is to this inhalation hazard, is early in one of the press conferences, and I don't know which agency said it, but somebody from one of the agencies, one of the health departments I believe, said, well, just because you can smell it doesn't mean it's bad for you. They don't have that data. Nobody has that data. We don't know the inhalation risk on MCHM. We don't know what the odor threshold is on MCHM. We can look at certain components of MCHM and know that, for example, with methanol, if you can smell it, it's already above a human health standard. It's already bad for you. And so we don't know that about these chemicals, and we certainly don't know it about the breakdown products. So I know I flew through that quickly, and I think that I hope that I've made my points, and I'd be happy to have any questions.
Mr. Senator, I think you did make your point, and it's quite depressing.
It is
that's
depressing.
The news we need to hear, and unfortunately, the news that's been coming out of some of the agencies and so forth sounds as if they've not been based off of any scientific factors, and I'm glad you're being able to clarify that. Questions from the members? Questions from the members? I think we're a little bit in shock at some of this. Co-Chair Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In these studies, most of the studies that have been done by Eastman, were those mainly for acute exposure, or has there been any studies that deal with chronic exposure in small doses such as our population has been exposed to?
I'm not aware of the chronic doses. Most of what we're seeing is acute toxicity. You know, most of the acute toxicity tests are done for the purpose of occupational exposures where you may get a high dose in a short period of time. There are some aquatic tests for water quality purposes that have been done, but even those I think were acute tests.
You know, with the need for more information currently in regard to the risk assessment to human health, apparently you believe we need to do further studies on these chemicals and the constituents that the MCHM breaks down to. Is Marshall and WVU equipped to perform these studies, and how much do you think a study like this would cost for human monitoring as well as laboratory studies on the breakdowns of the chemicals?
Well, I'm confident that the universities can do a lot of this work. We're just now, I mean, we're still forming the questions. We're still trying to figure out what we don't know to come up with, I mean, we figure out something new every day. Certainly the breakdown products, we could start looking at those right away. The universities are certainly equipped to do those kinds of things. Again, I have no idea what the cost is. The human health risk assessment, more toxicity testing certainly needs to be done. But the biggest problem is, and my biggest concern is, we still don't have a good handle on what it is we're being exposed to or at what concentrations. But yes, obviously I'm a big fan of the universities, and so certainly a lot of that work can be done here.
One final question, Mr. Chairman. So apparently you're still doing studies out in the community, and are you still finding residual presence of MCHM and potentially other contaminants?
Yes, we are. And it took, as you can imagine, the labs were inundated early on. And so we're just now starting to get that analytical data. But yes, as recently as yesterday, the data that we got still shows that it's still out there. And the fact is, we have a great sensor in the human nose oftentimes, so people are still smelling it. So even, sometimes we get non-detects depending on the lab's detection limits, but we can still smell those constituents. And of course, a lot of folks aren't looking for these breakdown products, and we don't have a good handle on what all the breakdown products are. So certainly we're still seeing the things that we do know to look for.
In your investigation, have you been doing any breakdowns, possible the coating within the piping systems of houses, hot water heaters, the reservoir of toilets? I mean, they're finding residues on the surfaces within these particular items.
Some work has been done. I mean, frankly, we're all pretty covered up. There's so much to be done. And so I know that some folks, for example, some engineers out of Alabama have looked specifically at those things. And they're experts in looking at basically things sticking to pipes. But we also know that, as I mentioned, this 15 minutes or 30 minutes of flushing isn't doing the trick. And so we know that stuff is sticking. Exactly what the mechanism is and where exactly it's happening is unclear right now. We've got many different types of piping and hot water heaters, and there's a lot of things that can be sticking to. It's not as easy as saying, well, does it stick to iron water pipe? It's much more complicated than that.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned formaldehyde is one of the breakdown products. What are some others that you're finding?
I'd have to go back through. It's like trying to remember the 4-cyclomethylhexa. It's the only one that we've seen popping up so far. And again, we're just now getting the data as of yesterday on these breakdown products. The only thing we've seen so far is the formaldehyde.
That's the one that's raising most red flags.
Yes, absolutely.
And I assume that you would state that you would not drink the water, you would not cook with it. I mean, from from your opinion, we hear that pregnant women should not, like many people have a 3-year-old daughter, a pregnant wife, so, what is your recommendation for families?
Everybody keeps asking me that, and because it's unknown, I can only tell you what I'm doing at my home.
Sure.
And I have put an activated carbon filter on my house.
You put a what on your house, I'm sorry?
I put an activated carbon filter on the incoming line. We're on city water. We're out in Sissonville. Used to be on a well. My wife hated the well because there was so much iron in it, and now she's talking about going back to the well, which we may do. Anyway, I put an activated carbon filter on the house. We haven't seen the impacts at our house. However, and I've got 7-year-old twins, and we're not drinking the water. We're not cooking with the water. We do bathe in it. But frankly, the formaldehyde has me personally, frankly, a little freaked out. So all I can say is this is what we're doing. We don't have enough data to know what's bad, what's horrible, what's okay, and that's part of the problem. So I tell my friends and my family, this is what we know. Your level of what risk you will accept is, up to you. I can only tell you what I'm doing, and I'm not drinking the water.
Sure, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Senator Layer. Senator Layer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You indicated, I guess, the individual evidence we have of adverse health reactions is, at least at this point, somewhat anecdotal. And I guess my question is more from a sort of a biomedical standpoint. As people, I assume folks are going to ERs and family practice docs and those kinds of things. But do we have, the type of diagnostic testing capabilities at some point will take individual reactions beyond anecdotal suggestions that this is the only thing I've done different to actually be able to isolate and get to the area of causation?
That's difficult. That's true of any of these types of scenarios, because we know that people are going, to an urgent care versus the hospital, and the hospitals may be reporting and the urgent cares aren't. And the doctors are going to look for other reasons, and some of them are going to think, wow, the water's contaminated, and some of them are going to not even think a thing about it. People that have been traveling through the area and go to their doctor in Morgantown, or so getting a handle on that is, that would be a better question for the health departments. But the problem is that a lot of that data was not collected when it all happened, and so it'd be kind of a retrospective analysis.
Do you know if there's any effort to kind of collate and keep that?
I do not, and frankly, what it's unfortunate that our system is not more holistic, where we can have a holistic approach of all the agencies that are involved, and so everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And unfortunately, that system isn't in place, so I don't know what the health folks are doing.
Thanks, sir.
Senator Miller.
The testing and the sticking and all of that type of thing, it just occurred to me, we've just had 300,000 people flush their systems. Are we testing discharges from sewers, or are we finding what happens when this is like the sewer system?
That's a great question. It ends up back in the rivers, and whether these are organic contaminants, and that's a question it's a great question that hasn't been answered as far as I know. Is it breaking down in the wastewater treatment plant, where a lot of contaminants will break down? The problem is it getting completely mineralized to carbon dioxide and water, or are we now discharging formaldehyde out into the river? And so that's a great question. I mean, it is certainly all connected. It's a cycle. The water just doesn't go away when we flush the toilet. It does eventually end up back in the rivers and back in our water supply.
And likewise, just thinking, I take medication. I'm using bottled water. I don't really trust bottled water totally, because I understand this is a great thing. I'm curious how this reacts with some people's medications.
That's also a great question. And it's one of the many unknowns that we have concerning this particular spill.
Thank you.
Any further questions about members? Dr. Simonton, you're also a professor at Marshall University,
Yes.
and what is your position at Marshall? What are you professor of?
I'm the program coordinator for the master's degree in environmental science, and I also teach environmental engineering courses.
And the reason we want to work with you on recommendations, I know right now you're trying to get a handle on the testing and see what's out there. The fact that you've identified formaldehyde, and particularly down in a very prominent business, the Vandalia Grill downtown, kind of leads to believe it's probably in other areas throughout this valley. And then,
Yes.
then the fear of breathing it. I mean, I know I've not been drinking it either, but you get in the shower and you can't hold your breath that long. This is just shocking. So,
I absolutely agree. It's frightening. It really is frightening. What we know scares us, and we know there's a lot more that we don't know.
would you be willing to come back and testify and talk to us in the future as you get more information?
Absolutely.
And also any recommendations you have that we can do to better protect our water resources, would you share that with us?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Thank you. One more. Senator Stallings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, again, I love the idea of trying to use both Marshall and WVU because we do have two really excellent institutions. Has anyone from WVU or have you contacted WVU about some way to work together?
Not right now, only because we're so busy doing our thing. I know that WVU is involved. I should throw a plug in for Wheeling Jesuit and Ben Stout. They've got a lot of ability up there also. So at some point, I hope there's a breather where we can sit back and try to coordinate those efforts, because certainly that makes the most sense.
And again, methanol is one of the, when the old folks in the hills and hollows make moonshine trying to get ethanol,
Right.
some of it ends up as methanol and you have some acute toxicity.
I wouldn't know anything about that, Senator.
Renal failure. Nor would I. Blindness. But this is obviously a different animal. It's got a methyl moiety to it and all that other stuff. By the way, who is the environmental quality? What is your?
The EQB, I was appointed by Governor Wise, but we are a quasi-judicial body that oversees water and waste permitting issues, in short, with DEP. So it's a 5-member board, and we basically act as a 5-person judge.
And it's a state.
It is a state board, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further questions? Could you provide us with copies of your slides?
Yes, sir.
As well as the reports you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Do you have those?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.